I am reading part 3 of BABARA MARX HUBBARD and the Malthusian Transhumanist Riders of the Pale Horse. This is part 3. Hubbard and the Sustainable Malthusian Globalism of the Rockefeller Dynasty. Hubbard's Malthusian outlook toward conscious evolution was shared not only by Salk, but also by her beloved patron, Lawrence S. Rockefeller, who bankrolled her Foundation for Conscious Evolution, which calls for radical evolutionary technologies to be bolstered as remedies for a complex series of crises, most especially environmental crises, which are acting as evolutionary drivers, pressuring us to innovate and transform. Rockefeller, whose Venrock venture capital firm has bankrolled transhumanist science and technologies, including biotech, nanotech, and AI, is praised by Hubbard in 5 of her books over a span of 22 years, between 1993 and 2015. Not only did the transhumanist interest of Rockefeller and Hubbard converge, but they also shared the common belief that Malthusian ecological crisis must be met with global sustainable development policies entailing human population control and environmental conservation. According to a biography titled Lawrence S. Rockefeller, Catalyst for Conservation, Lawrence championed the Malthusian ecological philosophy of his brother JDR, John D. Rockefeller III, whose interest in population control he shared. The Malthusian philanthropies of Lawrence and John D. III, the latter of whom was the chairman of the U.S. Commission on Population Growth and the American Future, were inspired by their father, John D. Rockefeller Jr., who funded Nazi eugenics programs through the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology, Human Heredity, and Eugenics. The Malthusianism of Lawrence and John D. III was also inspired by John D. Jr.'s crony, Henry Fairfield Osborn Jr., the son of Henry Fairfield Osborn Sr., who was a co-founder of the American Eugenics Society. Osborn Jr. was also the cousin of Frederick Osborn, who was both a director of the AES and a co-founder of John D. III's Population Council. It was Frederick Osborn who professed that eugenic goals could be more effectively attained through crypto-eugenics under the guise of family planning and Malthusian ecology, the latter of which is a pillar of Hubbard's transhumanist schema for conscious evolution. In Lawrence S. Rockefeller, Catalyst for Conservation, Lawrence's biographer records how the young LSR learned from him, Henry Fairfield Osborn Jr., quite early about the world's growing problem with overpopulation, an interest shared with John D. Rockefeller III. Above all, Lawrence Rockefeller recalled Osborn helped him to understand participating in doing, not simply in passive philanthropy, but in playing an active role within his philanthropic interests. Lawrence was so inspired by Osborn Jr. that he beamed about how he felt they shared an interrelated energy field. Years after they met, Osborn recognized the younger man's similar curiosity, sending him a portrait inscribed, "From one rogue to another." Not only was Osborn Jr. a muse for Lawrence's Malthusian ecological philanthropy, but over the years, Osborn and LSR is Lawrence S. Rockefeller. I'm just going to say that. And LSR worked together on many projects, from the goals of Save the Redwoods to the development of the Bronx Zoo into a wildlife conservation society. In 1972, honoring the legacy of his deceased Malthusian mentor, Lawrence wrote a Reader's Digest article on the most unforgettable person I ever met, which lauded Osborn's dynamism, his writings on the post-war population explosion, and his sense of global responsibility. About a decade after Lawrence's death, he was similarly eulogized by Hubbard in the dedication to her 2015 Evolutionary Testament of Co-Creation. As I document in Barbara Malthusian Hubbard, From Limits to Growth to Agenda 2030, out of the 5 books in which Hubbard lauds Rockefeller, 4 of them advance Hubbard's calls for population control and sustainable development in order to avert Malthusian crisis. In addition to spreading Hubbard's Malthusian crisis gospel by bankrolling her books, Lawrence also financed a Rockefeller Brothers Fund environmental program that conducted scientific anticipatory analysis of the way in which population, resources, food, capital, pollution, and values interact. On top of funding Malthusian crisis propaganda and Malthusian environmental programs, Hubbard's Rockefeller benefactor founded the Conservation Foundation, which was later merged with the World Wildlife Fund, WWF. The WWF had been set up by Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, and Julian Huxley. A former Nazi stormtrooper, Prince Bernhard, who was also a founder of the Bilderberg Group, was the honorary sponsor of the 3rd annual meeting of the WEF, the World Economic Forum. At this 1973 annual meeting, Club of Rome co-founder Aurelio Pecci, I hope that's how you say it, Aurelio Pecci, who met personally with Hubbard in 1972, preached the Malthusian gospel of limits to growth, which would lay the groundwork for the Sustainable Development Initiatives of UN Agenda 2030 and the World Economic Forum's Great Reset. The limits to growth thesis was resounded by Hubbard in several of her books, including Conscious Evolution, Birth 2012 and Beyond, Emergence, The Shift from Ego to Essence, and the published and unpublished versions of the Book of Co-Creation. Prince Philip, who was akin to Prince Bernhard and several other members of Hitler's Nazi Party, was the father of the current King of the United Kingdom, Charles III, who launched the World Economic Forum's Great Reset and the Terra Carta Mandate of the Sustainable Markets Initiative in an anthology titled If I Were an Animal, which donated sales royalties to the World Wildlife Fund. Prince Philip confessed that he was tempted to ask for reincarnation as a particularly deadly virus to call the population explosion of the human species and in turn protect endangered species. The president of the British Eugenics Society and the first Director General of the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, Julian Huxley, coined the term transhumanism in his 1957 book, New Bottles for New Wine. In UNESCO's 1946 mission statement, UNESCO, its purpose and its philosophy, Huxley called for a global eugenics program and a global population control policy. This is a quote. The recognition of the idea of an optimum population size, of course relative to technological and social conditions, is an indispensable first step toward that planned control of populations which is necessary if man's blind reproductive urges are not to wreck his ideals and his plans for material and spiritual betterment. The recognition of the fact that the wildlife of the world is irreplaceable, but that it is being rapidly destroyed, is necessary if we are to realize in time that areas must be set aside where, in the ultimate interests of mankind as a whole, the spread of man must take second place to the conservation of other species. Unquote. Not only was the World Wildlife Fund set up by these prominent Malthusians with the help of Russell E. Train, who was a Rockefeller Brothers Fund trustee, But the WWF, which advances UN Agenda 2030 through the UN High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, has explicitly advocated for Malthusian family planning programs. In brief, for the WWF, wildlife conservation and human population control are interlinked elements of sustainable Malthusian development. It is worth noting here that in a 2020 WWF video, Sir David Attenborough, who is a World Economic Forum member, called for stabilizing the human population as low as we fairly can. It is also worth noting that numerous other WEF members are also WWF officials, including all these names that you can pause and read. I'll just do a few, because Shi Wang, David Dow, Andrea Fowler, Jim Sano, David Miller, Emilio Tenuta, Juan G. Okay, I'm done. A bunch of other people. Wildlife conservation and population control are similarly hitched together by Hubbard in Alternative to Armageddon, which asserts that in order to save animals from killers, a planetary tribulation must ensue, so that the killers must not survive to become universal humans. Oh, so if you eat meat, you're a killer and you can't survive and be a universal human. And you know how the Bible says that about forbidding marrying and eating meat? Sorry, just thought of that. Quote, human history has been a difficult and as yet incomplete effort to overcome the mammalian defect programmed in our genes, killing animals and each other. We are heading toward the birth canal with this defect uncorrected. Hundreds of millions are still killing animals and each other. This is why tribulations must be so severe on your planet. The killers must not survive to become universal humans. Unquote. Wow. Also, I'd like to point out, I did a video with Barbara Marx Hubbard and Brian Simmons of the Passion Bible, where she talked about the babies we eat. And I think that's what she actually means. So I'm just saying, she's not a good person, but I don't think she was talking about actually eating babies. I think she was talking about animals. Okay, unpause. Ironically, Hubbard's remedy for the killing of wildlife is the selective culling of human beings. It can be inferred that the killers who must not survive belong to the 1/4 of the defective seeds who must be destroyed in order to midwife humankind through its cosmic Malthusian birth crisis into a new transhuman species. Notice here that this passage reinvokes Hubbard's birth crisis eschatology through the imagery of heading toward the birth canal. Notice also that this passage echoes Huxley's decree that man must take second place to the conservation of other species. Yeah, they're just talking about themselves. They're the other species. Hubbard also collaborated with WWF trustee Maurice Strong, who served alongside her on the Global Advisory Board of the World Future Society. According to Lawrence S. Rockefeller, Catalyst for Conservation, Lawrence had conversations with and high regard for such individuals as Maurice Strong from the United Nations. In fact, Lawrence was a member of the U.S. delegation to the 1972 UN Conference on the Human Environment, which was led by Strong, who later set up the 1992 UN Earth Summit Conference, where the Millennium Development Goals, MDGs, of UN Agenda 21 were established as the precursors to the SDGs of the UN Agenda 2030. Meanwhile, Lawrence financed a battery of sustainable development projects as trustee of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. It is keen to note here that SDG 5.6 affirms the neo-Malthusian family planning tenets of the Program of Action of the UN's 1994 International Conference on Population and Development. the godfather of the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. Strong was a WEF Foundation board member who also crossed paths with Hubbard at the State of the World Forum, which was orchestrated by the first and only president of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, who was also a member of the Malthusian Club of Rome. The SWF also brought together an array of Hubbard's New Age allies, along with key WWF officials, including the WWF Senior Program Officer James Cavalier and the WWF Chair Ruud Lubbers, who was also the Prime Minister of the Netherlands. At the same time, the SWF was also included several members of the WEF and the Club of Rome, along with Lawrence's nephew, Stephen C. Rockefeller, who was the chair of the International Drafting Committee of Earth Charter, which Gorbachev co-created, with Strong as the UN Agenda 21 proxy. Through a merger of Gorbachev's Green Cross International and Strong's Earth Council. According to the Rockefeller Brothers Fund website, Stephen Rockefeller became an RBF trustee in 1977 and joined Lawrence and several like-minded cousins in embracing spiritually grounded approaches to a new ecological ethos. Wow. And there we have Mikhail Gorbachev, Stephen C. Rockefeller, and Maurice Strong. It is worth noting here that the Rockefeller dynasty not only purchased and donated the land upon which the UN headquarters were built, but the House of Rockefeller also financed some of the UN World and International Population Conferences that paved the way for the neo-Malthusian population policies that are embedded into the SDGs of UN Agenda 2030, which Hubbard endorsed during her 2016 address to the UN High-Level Forum on the Culture of Peace. It is also worth noting that Lawrence's Rockefeller Brothers Fund and his venture capital firm Venrock have financed sustainable development technologies since 1980, and they continue to invest in sustainability enterprises today. In sum, Lawrence Rockefeller and Barbara Marx Hubbard shared a common Malthusian vision of conscious transhuman evolution. Through collaborations with the UN, both Lawrence and Barbara advanced the Malthusian population policies that undergird the Sustainable Development Goals of the Agenda 2030, which was spawned by their mutual comrade Maurice Strong. By proxy, Gorbachev's SWF brought together Strong, Hubbard, and Lawrence's nephew, along with top officials from the UN, the World Economic Forum, the Club of Rome, and the World Wildlife Fund, all of which are pivotal institutions driving the Malthusian SDG initiatives of the Great Reset and the Fourth Industrial Revolution. In short, Hubbard's liaison with Lawrence Rockefeller intersected through momentous positions at the Malthusian nexus of world governance institutions such as the UN, globalist roundtable, NGOs such as the World Economic Forum, and the SWF and the Club of Rome, and nonprofit environmentalist foundations such as the World Wildlife Fund. Crisis Reaction Solution. Altogether, Hubbard's gospel of Malthusian transhumanist crisis evolution was inspired by her noetic muse, Teilhard de Chardin, shared by her kindred spirit, Jonas Salk, and bankrolled by her beloved patron, Lawrence Rockefeller. While Salk compiled Malthusian population reports for the UN, Rockefeller helped shape the formation of the World Wildlife Fund and participated in Maurice Strong's UN Conference on the Human Environment, which laid the groundwork for Agenda 2030 and the Neo-Malthusian SDGs that Hubbard endorsed at the UN High-Level Forum on the Culture of Peace. Today, Jonas Salk Institute and Lawrence's Venrock, along with his Rockefeller Brothers Fund, are advancing sustainable development initiatives and transhumanist biotechnologies that align with their previously stated views. Meanwhile, as the Great Reset is barreling forward, Hubbard's crisis collectivism has been assimilated by the World Economic Forum, which has been stoking fears of environmental crisis and public health crisis in an effort to goad populations into submitting to the biotech mandates and sustainable development overhauls of the transhumanist Fourth Industrial Revolution. Ostensibly, these alarms of global crisis could be tabulated as evidence validating Hubbard's evolutionary crisis prophecy. Nonetheless, these crises could be contrived, exaggerated, or intentionally mismanaged in order to foment the ostensive emergencies necessary to coerce people into capitulating to the sustainable transhumanist technocracy of the Great Reset and the Fourth Industrial Revolution and Project 2025. I'm sorry, I just threw that in there. At a 1975 Lindisfarne Fellows Conference titled Conscious Evolution and the Evolution of Consciousness, Salk gave a presentation that was contextualized within the prospects of a technocratic elite manipulating Malthusian crisis in order to impose draconian systems of totalitarian control under the pretense of crisis management. William Irwin Thompson, the founder of the Lindisfarne Association, which was funded by Lawrence Rockefeller, prefaced Salk's lecture with the premise that we are living in one of the greatest historical crises, which could pose absolutely no other future ahead of us but a kind of authoritarian convergence of the military-industrial complex and the multinational corporations, creating a form of crisis management by which a kind of new elite, possibly a computer scientist elite, will use the crisis to gain new controls and manage society to take over. Wow. Whether organic or astroturfed, environmental crisis and public health crisis are being leveraged by the technocratic globalist elites of the WEF and the UN in order to accelerate the sustainable transhumanist development overhauls of the Great Reset and the Fourth Industrial Revolution. It is perhaps moot to quibble over whether the global elite sincerely intend to save the planet and evolve the human species, or whether they surreptitiously intend to take over the world. In either case, it remains incumbent upon conscientious freethinkers to balk when globalist elite technocrats such as Klaus Schwab or New Age gurus such as Barbara Marx Hubbard offer Malthusian transhumanist solutions that are arguably worse than the crisis themselves. In the next and final article in this series, I finally will unveil how Hubbard's affiliations with the World Future Society, the Human Potential Movement, and the Foundation for Conscious Evolution were connected to networks of alleged pedophile pays and SA abuse cults. And that is the end of this article. Well, that was very interesting. I think I learned a lot more about Barbara Marx Hubbard and the gargantuan network of people from the past and present that are working towards this. And I guess for me, the main takeaways in comparing this agenda to the New Age movement in general is the deification of man, the idea of oneness, everyone being all of one mind linked together, conscious union with the divine as a way to become Christed, and that they even have a mark. So I'm going to add a few quotes. This is from a video I did about the New Age movement from my They Crept In series, where it's just a lot of quotes from Barbara Marx Hubbard and other New Agers. So, and I don't know when the next part will be out. This was the most recent in that series, and I'll be reading it when it does come out. So thank you for watching or listening. I did not intend for you to deify me, but to deify yourselves as being at the same stage of evolution as I am. I did not suffer on the cross and rise again on the third day to show you what I could do, but what you can do. Yours is the power, yours is the glory. That is my message to you. And that sounds a little bit like something Bill Johnson said. We'll see later. Dearly beloved, I approached the crucifixion far more easily than I approached the selection. The crucifixion was done unto my body. The selection will be done unto yours. So, in the New Age, they do have a concept of cleansing or purification, where unbelievers, that means people who do not believe that they are God, will be cleansed from the earth. Here's another one. The fundamental regression is self-centeredness, or the illusion that you are separate from God. Pause. So, in their terms, self-centeredness is believing that you're separate from God. I make war on self-centeredness. It shall surely be overcome. The child must become the adult. Human must become divine. That is the law. The surgeon dare leave no cancer in the body when he closes up the wound after a delicate operation. We dare leave no self-centeredness on earth after the selection process. For when we complete the process of the transformation, all who live on will be empowered to be godlike. The book was called The Revelation. Your crisis is a birth. It says, you are to provide the opportunity for a planetary signal wherein each person who chooses life over death can register that decision visibly, a coming to witness before the world. A visible sign. They have a mark. That she's talking about the mark. Each shall be sealed with the seal of the living God. This means that they shall be marked, visibly identified, first to themselves, then to others. This means that their inner eye in the forehead will be fully opened by this touch. By this touch. Henceforth awakening them from the womb of self-centeredness. Okay, so they have a Christ. They have a mark. Those with the seal of the living God on their foreheads will be with Christ at the time of the transformation.
Run.
There's just one name that can keep you out of hell, and it's the name of Jesus. The name of Jesus.